In today's video, I wanted to begin my journey through the Imperial cult questline, starting with Sinolian Tunifus's quests featured in Morrowind. His 7 quests are all part of the overarching questline for the cult. In order to even begin, the player has to enlist in the faction. You need to speak with one of 11 listed members, each one belonging to one of Vvardenfell's Imperial outposts. In my case, I was granted access into the guild by Summitus Vunus at Fort Moonmoth. By paying 50 septims, the guild dues, the player is welcomed with open arms. As for what the cult is all about, they worship the 9 divines and are essentially missionaries. Their goal is to spread the blessings of those deities all across Tamriel. They also have their own set of special quests and tasks that certain members need to carry out. Some involve combat, others involve collecting ingredients, and a select few involve collecting donations. Vunus says that those who join the guild have intentions of becoming priests and clerics, those who heal and help the less fortunate. Once the player is a member of the faction, they'll be granted the rank of layman, and your work can officially begin. Resuming the conversation with Summitus, he tells me that the cult is currently in need of almoners, lay healers, and shrine sergeants. Almoners are the dew collectors and report to Iolus Trupter in Ebonheart. Lay healers gather ingredients and deliver potions to those who are in need. They report to Sinolian Tunifus at Ebonheart. Then, as for the shrine sergeants, they deliver packages, messages, and escort other members to dangerous places. They need to report to Kay, who's also in Ebonheart. So, leaving the conversation, it seems like there's only one place to go at this point. As per the job description, you can probably tell that Tunifus's quests aren't going to be that difficult, and in fact, are quite simple. Honestly, for all of the Imperial cult, I heard that it's a very good questline for new characters to run through. It's great at introducing you to the world, you learn a lot about skills like alchemy and restoration, and you receive a lot of decent beginner gear. Plus, to have those healing services available early on is also a really great perk. All of the quest givers for the Imperial cult are actually located in the Imperial chapels of Ebonheart, so unlike most other quest lines, there's very little travel needed in between each quest. A simple mark spell in the middle of the room should work for the rest of the story. However, for the contents of the quests themselves, the player is definitely a world traveler, as you get sent from coast to coast and everywhere in between. Arriving in the Imperial chapels, I looked around the main chamber in search of Sinolian. Not finding him with the rest of the members, I descended to the lower level and located the lay healer in the quarters section. Speaking with Sinolian, he introduced himself and asked if I was ready for my tasks as a healer. Telling him yes, he gave me a pretty simple first quest. Tunifus wanted me to collect 5 samples of Marshmerrow. They're used in restore health potions and are quite the handy ingredient to have. Apparently, the cult has an agreement with a farmer named Balor Salvu. Salvu lives near Pelagiad and grows the marrow. As a bit of a peace offering, Sinolian hands me a quality Fortify Strength potion to give to Balor. To be honest, I found the instructions on how to reach the farmer a little confusing. Tunifus said north of the road but south of Pelagiad. There are some houses in between the town square and the road, and some are even farms. However, none of them were Salvu's. You see, the missing clue here was the next part of the directions, west of the first bridge, south of Pelagiad. After wandering back and forth through the Ascadian Isles, I finally clued in on where the farm was. Balor was wandering around his land, and speaking with him, he happily accepted Sinolian's present. He asked what he could do for me, and that's when I brought up the Marshmerrow. Salvu said that the marrow was growing just beside us, and that I could help myself to the 5 samples. Before ending the conversation, he asked if there was anything else he could do for me. This is when I got a little greedy and asked him to teach me something. Fortunately, Salvu was a good sport about it, and he actually gifted me a book called The Cake and the Diamond. He's already committed it to memory, and therefore doesn't need it anymore. The Cake and the Diamond is an alchemy skill book, and especially for this questline, it can prove to be very useful. Heading to the Marshmerrow field, I picked all 5 samples rather quickly, and was soon good to go. Recalling to the chapels, I reported into Tunifus, and he rewarded me for my efforts. He handed me an apprentice mortar and pestle, as well as a standard restore health potion. The lay healer said that with them, I could start to make my own health potions. With that, thus ends the quest, gathering Marshmerrow. Chatting with Sinolian again, he tells me that he's been so busy and asks if I've had the chance to check in for an advancement. Doing so, I apparently met all of the requirements as I was promoted to the rank of novice. Continuing the conversation, Sinolian gives me my next set of orders. He wants to make some cure disease potions and in turn needs 5 samples of muck. According to Tunifis, the cult has an agreement with a farmer named Abishpulu Shand over in Nissus. Shand grows the muck outside his hut, and while in town, Sinolian wants me to pay a visit to Fort Darius and give Chaplain Ogrel 4 bargain restore health potions. As a possible introduction to the game's fast traveling system, Tunifis hands me 80 gold pieces and tells me to take the Siltstrider services, as walking would apparently be a long adventure. In classic Questline fashion, the idea is that the player gets sent to other branches of the faction in order to see what other benefits, features, and perks are out there. Like I said earlier though, the key difference here is that all of the quest givers are in Ebonheart. So, for Chaplain Ogrel, the delivery is more so meant to have the favor returned in some way. Arriving in Nissus, I actually wasn't quite sure where the Shand Muck Sponge farm was. I ended up harvesting the muck from the Vabdis hut just outside of town. This still worked and I got my 5 samples, but I ended up ruining some poor farmer's harvest in return. As for the Shand Muck, it's actually located right by the Legion's barracks, which is relatively close to Fort Darius. Again, either patch works. I guess just for your role-playing morals, one might be the better option. As for Chaplain Ogrel, I found him in the lower section of the fort. Speaking with the orc, he welcomed me to Darius' shrine and extended his thanks for the restore health potions. In return, he offered me a favor, which of course I took him up on. Apparently, Sinolian suggested for the chaplain to teach me a trick of some kind, and Ogrel offers to show me one of 4 restoration spells: strength, willpower, speed, or luck. I also have the option to decline the offer, but one of these would actually prove very useful to my character in the long run. Bone Walkers are an enemy that I don't face very often, but when I do, they end up doing a number on my strength. Since that's really the only attribute that gets damaged on my character, I figured might as well learn how to restore it. So, Ogrel teaches me the spell, sends his regards to Sinolian, and sends me on my way. Recalling to the Imperial chapels, I reported to Tunifis and he rewarded me for my efforts. The lay healer gifted me a potion of cure common disease, an apprentice retort, and a book called the Alchemist's Formulary. While not a skill book, the formulary is actually a recipe book that instructs the player on how to make a variety of different potions. It's something that definitely would have come in handy pre-forums and walkthroughs. With that, thus ends the quest, Gathering Muck. Resuming the conversation with Tunifis, he told me to inquire about a possible promotion. Doing so, he granted me to the rank of Initiate. What's more, he then offered me a token of the cult's appreciation. In his words, since I'd proven to be a loyal and diligent member to the faction, Sinolian rewarded me with a Marin amulet. When used, the amulet fortifies speechcraft, restoration, mysticism, and conjuration, all for 5 points for 30 seconds. On to the next job, the Imperial instructed me to gather some Willow Anther, which is used in creating cure paralyzation potions. As for the source, well, Tunifis admits to stealing the Willow from someone named Gurak Grobagrat's house. Bagrat is a criminal, and while the lay healer doesn't condone stealing, he thinks about the dynamic and puts the needy first. Gurak's house is north of Ivek's foreign quarter. Tunifis calls him a smuggler, as it's common knowledge he deals skooma. The flowers can be found outside his house, so the job should be simple enough. However, Sinolian warns me not to enter his home, and stresses that I should not try and speak with the orc. Well, of course, when someone in Morrowind tells me not to do something, it piques my curiosity and I have to try it out. Bagrat's house is easily accessible via the road that leads north out of Ivek. Arriving at the Netch ranch, I found the willow flowers in pots just outside the front door. Picking 5 was no problem at all. There was no trouble whatsoever with the orc or the Komoda Tom. I could have recalled back to the Imperial chapels and would have been done with this quest. However, I really wanted to see Gurak's operation for myself. On the main floor of the plantation, there were 2 orcs, Gackenfeld and Dregs, and they were decked out in full sets of armor, guarding some kind of blocked door. Preparing myself for a fight, I cast an unlocking spell, but surprisingly, the bodyguards didn't care. Stepping on through, their gaze stayed elsewhere, and I was free to descend to the lower levels. Getting through another locked door, I turned the corner and spotted Bagrat as well as one of his accomplices. Gurak is a level 15 smuggler who wields an orcish warhammer. His partner, Thelsa Celerin, is a level 4 alchemist, and she fights using magic. If the player is up for the possibly challenging fight, you can get access to some pretty interesting gear. There's plenty of tools for the budding alchemist, decent weapons and armor, as well as a whole bunch of moon sugar and skooma bottles. With the right buyer, these could go a long way for your pocket. Recalling to the Imperial chapels, I thought for sure that Tunifus was going to be angry with me or penalize me in some way. However, he ended up not really caring about Bagrat's death. In fact, he didn't even mention it. As a reward for my efforts, Sinolian gives me a potion of cure paralyzation, and he also hands me a book called The Four Suitors of Benetah. The Four Suitors is a restoration skill book, and again, comes in handy for the up-and-coming priest/cleric. With that, thus ends the quest, gathering Willow Anther. Chatting again with Sinolian, he gets straight into the next task. There's no promotion or random reward this time round. The lay healer wants 5 samples of Scrib jelly for some cure blight potions. He directs me over to the Shulk egg mine, southwest of Balmora, as Scribs are in abundance there. Tunifus warns me though that while the Scribs and Quama workers are non-hostile, the foragers and the warriors will be, so I should take caution. In order to help with the hunt and to see what's lurking around each corner, the lay healer teaches me a detect creature spell. Scribs can actually be found all across Vardenfell. They're pretty easy to spot, especially from the main roads. What's more, they're even easier to hear as they let out this high-pitched screeching noise. So you don't need to go to the Shulk egg mine, but since they're highly concentrated in that one area, it's the most efficient way of collecting the jelly. As Sinolian said, the workers and the Scribs are no issue. Honestly, the worst part about this collection job is having these creatures block your path. Fortunately, there's no penalty for killing anything, so a simple slice or two with a sword will easily open the tunnel back up. Down here, you're bound to encounter the Quama foragers and even a warrior or two. They really aren't anything more than nuisance creatures. However, if you enter the Queen's Lair, there are actually some hostile miners. Civillo Althan and Dainilla Valis are egg poachers, and while they're not difficult to defeat, if you're a really low-level character, you might have your work cut out for you. Some extra tips and tricks for gathering the Scrib jelly include speaking with some of the miners outside the mine. Dinok is the Redguard worker by the fire, and raising his disposition, plus asking about the Scrib jelly, he hands you over a free sample. On top of that, right outside the mines themselves, there are a few Scribs just wandering around, so that could be 3 samples before you even step foot into the mine. In any case, with all 5 ingredients gathered, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Tunifus. As a reward for my efforts, Sinolian gives me a potion of cure blight disease, a potion of cure poison, and an apprentice's alembic. With that, thus ends the quest, gathering Scrib jelly. Resuming the conversation with Tunifus, he suggests that I inquire about an advancement. Doing so, Sinolian promotes me to the rank of Acolyte. What's more, after that, he gives me a little bonus for all the work I've been putting in for the Imperial cult. The lay healer rewards me with a Stendaran belt. When used, the belt fortifies attack, unarmored, blunt, and enchant, all for 5 points for 30 seconds. Getting into the next task, Tunifus asks for 5 units of Corkbulb. Unsurprisingly, the cult has an agreement with the Ascadian Isles plantation owners, and the faction's been granted access to their crops. Sinolian suggests that I start with Arvel Manor, which is right behind the Dren plantation. It's well north of Vivec, and since there's no direct route there, he teaches me a spell called Swimmer's Blessing, which boosts my swim speed for 5 points for 30 seconds. At this point, you probably get the idea for Sinolian Tunifus's quests. It's a really nice story arc for those who are looking to learn more about alchemy, and if you were to pair it with some of the Mages Guild quests, you get off on a really good foot. Interesting to note is that for a lot of these quests, the player can simply go to any old shop and buy the ingredients. If you just wanted to fast track the story, that's 100% an option. However, the lay healer's missions teach you where to find certain ingredients, as some are region locked. They also teach you about the relations that the cult has, aka the perks that come with your 50 gold donation. These are the various farmers and landowners around Vardenfell who depend on the shrine for their potions, and in turn, all the shrine asks for, apart from their ingredients, is that they hear about the 9 divines. As of this moment, the Arvel Manor is marked on my map, and from Vivec, it's pretty easy to get to, whether that's through walking, swimming, or levitation. Arriving, you'll notice the crop fields, the manor, the slaves, their shacks, and of course, the owners. Unfortunately, there's not much lore or info that comes out of this plantation while you're working with the cult. This area does have a lot of quests related to House Lalu, and there's certainly more story here than meets the eye. But for now, all the player can do is pick the Corkbulb and be on their way. The bulb plants are on the southwestern side of the farmland, and securing 5 samples is relatively easy. Once that was done, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Zenolian. As a reward, the Imperial gifts me 1 potion of Cure Common Disease and 1 standard Restore Health potion. With that, thus ends the quest, gathering Corkbulb root. Chatting again with Tunifus, he got straight into my next quest. The lay healer would like for me to secure 5 units of rat meat. This is in order to create some cure poison potions. He suggests that I look at the underworks in Vivec City, as the sewer systems there are crawling with the vermin. Zenolian warns me though that the underworks are also home to some unsavory characters and places, so I should proceed with caution. At this point, there are only 2 quests left for Tunifus' story arc. Everything's been beginner friendly, but you also might have noticed that Zenolian drops some sort of hint for a grander adventure. For example, with the Willow flowers, there was Gurak Grobagar. Now, with the rat meat, he says to be careful of the other things that might be lurking beneath Vivec, and trust me, there's a lot down here. The one and only cantid I ventured into was St. Delen. Traversing to the canal works and then the underworks was no issue. The rats were abundant here, and honestly, securing the 5 samples of rat meat was over with in about a minute. But again, there are other interesting things down here. Most are fairly dangerous and will wipe the floor with newer players, but once you get past them, they can yield some truly valuable treasures. For example, the St. Delen Underworks holds the shrine of Sheogorath. There are 4 hostile NPCs in and around the area, and they get up to level 18. If you manage to get by them, the spoils of Inipalat are yours and you can undergo Sheogorath's Daedric Shrine quest. This is just one of the many examples, as pretty much all of the cantons in Vivec City hold some sort of interesting person, place, or thing in their underworks. If you're brave enough to venture through each one, it surely won't disappoint. With the 5 samples of rat meat in my inventory, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Tunifus. As a reward for my efforts, the lay healer gifts me a potion of cure poison and 2 books, The Wraith's Wedding Dowry and Charwich Konig Volume 1. Zenolian says that since each task is getting trickier, these books will prove to be pretty useful. They're both skill books, and they both improve the reader's unarmored skill. With that, thus ends the quest, gathering rat meat. Resuming the conversation with Tunifus, I asked him for an advancement in rank. This is where the Imperial promoted me to the rank of Adept. As for the final quest from the lay healer story arc, Zenolian wanted me to bring him 1 sample of Netch leather. This requires the player to hunt and slay a Netch. According to Tunifus, the best area to start in is by Balor Salvu's house in the Ascadian Isles. He does warn me though to stay away from the Betty Netch, as they're apparently more dangerous than their male counterparts. Honestly, you can find Netch just about anywhere on Vardenfell. They're non-hostile creatures, meaning that you can start the fight off by getting a simple cheap shot in. Really, the only thing to consider is that almost all of them will be hovering in the air, so you might need some form of levitation or a ranged attack. For my case, I remembered seeing a whole bunch of them just outside of Gurak Grobagart's house, which was north of Vivec. This obviously makes sense because the orc's money front was being a Netch rancher. There aren't any penalties to attacking and killing these creatures, so you're free to go hog wild. While the Bull Netch are stronger opponents as they deal more damage and have more health, the Betty Netch have a higher aggression rate, so that's probably why Tunifus said to stay away from them. Regardless, these creatures will put up a good fight for lower level characters, but they shouldn't be much of an issue for higher level ones. 1 sample of leather is all you need, but getting carried away by the hunt, I ended up collecting more than my fair share. Once the bloodlust left my eyes, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Zenolian one last time. As a reward for my efforts, Tunifus gifted me 5 quality magicka resistance potions and a belt of Belina's soothing balm. According to the Imperial, Belina was a patron saint of Mara, and she's a role model for all members of the cult. After that, Zenolian finishes by saying that he has no more jobs for me. He suggests that I speak to the other members of the shrine, like the almoners and the shrine sergeants, as they may have different forms of work. Looking at the enchanted belt, it restores 3 to 12 points of health for 1 second on self. With that, thus ends the quest, gathering Netch leather. Honestly, Tunifus' quests were nice and simple. As a higher level character who has a lot of skin in the game, you might find it a little too entry level and or elementary. These were all essentially fetch quests and didn't require much difficulty or skill. However, as someone who doesn't know much about alchemy in the Elder Scrolls, I found a lot of the information here to be quite useful. I learned what some of these ingredients were used for, I learned where they grew, and I received a set of alchemical gear in the process. Something to remember for Morrowind is that while it's enticing to do every single questline, they were made and tailored for a specific class of players. For example, the Imperial cult is perfect for priests, healers, clerics, and just about anyone who isn't playing an outright warrior or combat-heavy class. However, with that being said, there are more than a handful of quests in this questline that heavily rely on the player's combat prowess, and I'll be getting into those next. Kay is one of the cult's staff sergeants, and he's in charge of handing out quests that deal with delivery, messages, and escorts. Like the other quest givers for the faction, he can be found in the main chamber of the Imperial chapels at Ebonheart. Speaking with the Red Guard, he introduces himself and asks if I'm ready to get started with his assignments. Telling him yes, the first quest is definitely a far cry off from most of Sinolian's missions. Kay says that recently, the cult treated a high elf named Carjarl for swamp fever. After Carjarl had left, the guild discovered that a prized chapel Limeware bowl had gone missing. The leading theory is that the high elf stole it, so Kay would like me to track him down and recover the bowl. The Red Guard suggests that I start by asking around the Altmer community, as they're a close bunch. Kay believes that Carjarl lives along the coast somewhere, as that's where most of the mud crabs are, and that's how he would have caught swamp fever. While not a difficult sounding first quest, it's certainly a pretty interesting one. You invite someone into your home, you help them out, and they pay you back by stealing something. It's definitely every host's nightmare. As per the suggestion of Kay, there's actually a couple of Altmer around Ebonheart that you can speak with. The one I went to was Fanaldil in the lower section of Hawkmoth's Legion garrison. Since he's also a healer, I figured we had some sort of connection with one another, and he'd really open up to me because of that. Well, not really. He was just the first high elf that I found, but asking about Carjarl, Fanaldil was really helpful. He tells me that the suspect lives in Narmok and gives me exact instructions on how to get there. After a few boat rides, I was in the Bitter Coast, and what's more, the thief Carjarl is actually standing right in front of the docks. You can't miss him. Speaking with the Altmer, he's pretty defensive in his opening line. He admits to being treated for swamp fever in Ebonheart, but denies any involvement in stealing the Limeware bowl. From there, he ends the conversation, and there isn't any more dialogue that can be explored. If this was one of the first quests that the players embarked on, you might be sort of stumped. How else could you proceed from here? Well, if you've been around the block a few times, you'd know that when someone refuses to talk about a missing item, you have to rummage through their belongings. Carjarl's house is directly in front of him, again just beside the docks. It's secured by a level 20 lock and is considered trespassing if you're caught breaking in. For my case, I was so close to being undetected, but some nosy person in Narmok laid eyes on me and the guards came running. However, if you're having trouble gaining access into the home, this may not be the worst play, as the fine is only 5 gold and the door is unlocked after that. The alternative is pickpocketing Carjarl for the key and gaining entrance that way, so there's a great deal of sneak involved regardless. Entering the Altmer's home, I began to look around the room for the bowl. In a barrel beside his dining table, I managed to find the chapel's prized piece. So I guess Carjarl's a liar and a thief. With the value of the bowl being placed at 1,000 gold, the story starts to make more sense. This wooden shack isn't the best, and if he finds a buyer for the bowl, he can maybe move to a place like Seydanin, or if he's lucky, Saran. Bowl in hand, I recalled to the guild and reported to Kay. As a reward, the trader gives me 200 gold pieces and 3 scrolls of divine intervention. Obviously, I'm already good on the spell, but those scrolls can really come in handy for newer players. With that, thus ends the quest, Missing Limeware. Speaking again with Kay, he suggested that I check in regarding any possible advancements. Doing so, he ended up promoting me to the rank of Disciple. What's more, for my efforts put into the cult, he rewarded me with something called the Septum Ring. When used, the Septum Ring fortifies attack, unarmored, blunt, and speechcraft, all for 10 points for 60 seconds. It's a slightly altered and slightly buffed version of the Stendarin belt. Getting into the next mission, Kay says that someone named Nethellis in Caldera believes that their house is haunted. If that's the case, the Red Guard suggests that I find myself an appropriate weapon. Nothing basic will do the trick. I either need something enchanted or something that's made out of silver or better. Spells will also work. To help me with possible costs, Kay hands me 200 gold and tells me to make haste. Depending on when you're doing this questline, this could be your first time dealing with the undead, hence Kay's dialogue. There are plenty of weapon vendors around Vvardenfell, and all of the mages guild halls have wizards who sell spells. Essentially, anything that's not a normal weapon should be fine here. Normal is classified as steel, bone mold, iron, wood, and chitin. Interestingly, fists are not under that list, so if you've got heavy hands, let them loose at the ghost. In the town of Caldera, there's a trader named Varric Germain. Germain sells a whole assortment of silver and or enchanted weapons. A lot of them are well under the 200 gold work comp, so it shouldn't be too tricky to acquire one. Once the player is ready, Nedelis' house is practically right across from the trader's. I went up to it and noticed that it was secured by a lock. Not wanting a repeat of Karjarl's place, I located the Bosmer and sparked up a conversation. Nedelis believes that the haunting has something to do with the trapdoor in his house. His landlord said not to go down it, let alone touch it. Even though he didn't, the haunting still occurred. Nightmares and apparitions. The wood elf pleads with me to solve his problem and hands over the key. Entering the home, everything in the main area seems in the ordinary. However, approaching the trapdoor, it's nameplated as Hellerin Ancestral Tomb, which cannot be a good sign. These ancestral tombs house the remains of ancient Dunmer families, and if you've done your fair share of exploration, you know what's likely down there. Luckily, there are only 2 enemies present. One of them is a skeleton champion, and it's located in the first room. The second one is the ghost that's been haunting Nedelis, and it's in the second chamber. It's plated as the ghost of Gallows Hellerin, and it's only placed at level 4. Once the specter was defeated, I was all good to go. There are various items down here for the taking, but most of them aren't that valuable. Returning topside, I told the Bosmer that the ghost was taken care of. He expresses his gratitude and remarks that he can finally get a good night's sleep. Recalling to Ebonheart, I reported my success to Kay. As a reward, the Red Guard gifted me 2 scrolls of Golnara's Eye Maze. These scrolls grant the user with anywhere from 25 to 75% chameleon for 60 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, The Haunting. Resuming the conversation with Kay, he gets right into the next task. The Shrine Sergeant says that once upon a time, the cult destroyed a coven of witches that were based out of Ashalmawia. However, one of the witches escaped. The Dunmer, Thelsa Dral, is believed to have sought refuge in Asha Ahi Egg Mine, just south of Kuhl. The miners there say that the place is cursed, so Kay is sending me in to exterminate the witch once and for all. Before leaving, the trader hands me 300 gold for any expenses. Content for the quests aside, you can see just how much money plays a role in the Shrine Sergeant's quests compared to the lay healer ones. Sinolian never handed me a septum, as his assignments were all about learning and establishing relationships with the people of Vvardenfell. Meanwhile, Kay's quests are more combat heavy and involve a fair bit of gold to get by. Again, this questline seems like it's mostly aimed at beginners, as the quests haven't been too difficult and there are a lot of soft tutorials present. However, I will say, for Thalis Dral the Witch, this was the most difficult quest for the Imperial cult yet, at least from my perspective. Reaching the egg mine was no issue. Using the guild's money, passage to Kuhl was easily paid for. From there, it was a straight shot south and directly east of Ashalmawia. Entering Asha Ahi, the miners are still here and they don't really talk about said curse or any disturbances. So, venturing through the mine, I slashed up some Quama foragers and hacked away at the workers until finally, I landed on my target. Thelsa Dral was not only hiding out in the mines, she even had her own entourage with her. Fighting by her side was a level 9 Nord barbarian named Hakon and a level 5 Dark Elf healer named Galena Gurith. Thelsa herself is level 10, and she can summon a whole bunch of creatures to aid her in the fight. Truly, the battle shouldn't have been that difficult for my character. However, those paralysis spells kept coming, and they lasted for quite some time. My health got lower than I expected, and the nerves started to rev up a bit. Luckily, at some point, I was able to break away from the close combat and take out both spellcasters without any more problems. Really, the rewards come from looting their corpses, as they have decent gear, enchanted items, and plenty of potions. When ready, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Kay. As a reward for my efforts, the Red Guard gifted me a ring called Firestone. When used, Firestone deals 1 to 25 points of fire damage on touch. With that, thus ends the quest, Thelsa Dral the Witch. Speaking again with Kay, he got right into the next mission. The Shrine Sergeant tells me that a couple of years ago, a member of the guild named Linus Eulis disappeared. Iolus was an acolyte out on a mission that was beyond his skill level. Lalatia Varian, the oracle of the faction, sent him out knowing that he wasn't ready. He kept begging for the job though, and his disappearance weighs heavy on her conscience. While the cult is doubtful he's still alive, they'd like his belongings recovered. Linus was carrying something called the Silver Staff of Shaming, as well as some other essential Imperial cult gear, like the Stendaran belt and the Marin amulet. Lalatia had a vision regarding the staff. She, quote, saw it lying in the land of burning rock, under the shadow of the Mountain of Fear. This was translated to be Mount Cand, and it's believed that the staff could be found somewhere where the setting sun or rising sun hits it. As a last piece of help, Kay gives me a detect enchantment ring, so that way I'll be able to locate the staff a little bit easier. Well, I'll be honest, this one was a bit of a doozy for me. Getting to Mount Cand itself wasn't really an issue. Since it's not marked on the map, it could be a little difficult for newer players to get to. However, if you make your way to Molag Mar, there are road signs that lead you straight to the mountain. It's best to be careful around here though, as there can be some pretty powerful enemies lurking on the pathways. Once I was at the entrance of the Mount Cand caverns, that's when I was a little stumped on the rest of the instructions. The staff was somewhere where the sun could hit it at its lowest points during the day. To me, that meant it was atop one of the higher points in the region. Where exactly though was the real question. At the same time, under the shadow of the Mountain of Fear could also mean that it's at the base of Mount Cand, so that was a bit of a throw-off too. There were plenty of tall hills and peaks that could have been the spot, and there were also a bunch of valleys and pits that could have been it as well. Plus, I didn't really know how to use the Detect Enchantment Ring. I'd cast the spell, but nothing would happen. I later learned that any enchantment items would show up on the map as blue circles, but as of that moment, I was in the dark. Honestly, I only lucked out through exploration. Atop the entrance of Mount Cand caverns, placed in between a den of rocks, I spotted the skeleton of Iolus. On his remains, he had all three items: the staff, the belt, and the amulet. The Staff of Shaming damages the target's willpower and intelligence for 5 to 12 points for 1 second. While this quest ended up taking me around 15 minutes to complete, if you know where the skeleton is, or know how to use the enchantment, it can probably take you less than 5. With all of the gear in hand, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Kay. The Red Guard took the belt and the amulet, so that they can be passed on to a new lay servant. As for the staff, the trader insisted that I keep it, as it can probably be useful to me. Plus, as a little bonus, Kay gifted me something called a Restoration Shirt, citing that it will keep me fresh during exercise. When used, the shirt fortifies fatigue for 1 to 10 points for 5 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, the Silver Staff of Shaming. At this point, there's only one more assignment from Kay. Speaking with him, he gets straight into it, no promotions or bonuses. Apparently, there's an Argonian named Okur who lives in Hlaoad. Okur, a follower of the Nine, has been visited by the ghost of a murder victim. The victim has some unfinished business in the realm of the living, and unfortunately, the village's guards are unable to help. So, Kay wants me to go and see what can be done for Okur and the ghost. Having the spirit laid to rest likely involves seeking justice of some kind. So far, Kay's quests have been a mishmash of things. As per the job description, there's sort of been deliveries, but the other 2 tasks have been lacking. I haven't delivered any messages to anyone, and I certainly haven't escorted anyone anywhere. Furthermore, there's been a lot of occult hunting, so to speak. Spirits and witches, which I suppose are the cult's problems, because they're the antithesis of the 9 divines, or maybe the people who called it in are worshippers of the 9, I'm not sure. But regardless, it's safe to say that it's a little more eventful than Sinolian's story arc. In any case, back to the task at hand, once I reached Hlaoad, I located Okur's hut and spoke with the Argonian. She thanked me for coming and detailed what's been happening. The restless spirit of someone named Juliel Omin has been visiting her. Omin was killed by a group of smugglers, and they took her amulet. Juliel can't find peace until the 4 smugglers are dead, and her amulet has been returned to her husband. This is where Okur asks me to venture into the cave of Ysamsi, which is just south of here, in order to defeat the bandits and retrieve the jewelry. All things considered, it's not the most complicated task. Ysamsi really is right by the village, and going on inside, I was already met with 2 out of the 4 smugglers pretty much right away. Dudley is a level 12 Red Guard warrior, and he fights using a steel longsword. Accompanying him is Thurvam Dralis. Dralis is a level 13 Dark Elf battle mage, and he relies on magic to fight. As of this moment, these would be the strongest opponents for Kay's questline that the player needs to tussle with. Fortunately, Ysamsi is pretty small, and it doesn't take too long to get to the remaining 2 smugglers. Larissa Sturgius is a level 13 Imperial warrior, and he fights using a steel claymore. Then lastly, there's the unofficial leader of the gang, Ralos Othrenum. Ralos is a level 16 Dark Elf assassin, and he fights using a steel jinx sword. What's nice is that apart from the first 2 baddies, it's possible to pull the last 2 separately, leading to a much easier fight. On Ralos' body, he has Juliel Omin's amulet. Before leaving, I highly recommend looting the containers in the cave. Smuggler dens are always chock full of valuable items, like enchanted gear, gems, soul gems, and even straight up gold. Once finished, I returned to Okur and Laoed and handed the amulet over. The Argonian said that her top priority is finding Omin's husband and handing the necklace over to him. With the smugglers dead, Juliel's spirit can finally be put to rest. With that taken care of, I recalled to Ebonheart and reported to Kay one last time. As a reward for my efforts, he gifted me 3 scrolls: the Scroll of Hellfire, the Scroll of Summon Flame Atronach, and the Scroll of the 5th Barrier. Also, the Red Guard told me that was it for the Shrine Sergeant quests. He's got no other assignments and suggests that I ask elsewhere for work. He thinks that I should try the Almoners or even Lelatia's Oracle quests. For those who are unaware, the scrolls that Kay gave me are actually very useful when in a bind. Hellfire makes the target weak to fire and deals incredible amounts of fire damage. Summon Flame Atronach is pretty self-explanatory and it lasts for 60 seconds. Then, the 5th Barrier adds shield for 25 points for 30 seconds on self. With that, thus ends the quest, Restless Spirit, and that concludes the Shrine Sergeant assignments. Even though there were only 5 quests from Kay, they were certainly different from a lot of the other ones in the Imperial cult. Those ones were more combat focused. While they didn't really teach the player hard skills like Senolians did with alchemy, restoration, and unarmored, they did a good job at teaching the player soft skills. Kay would frequently hand me some guild expenses so that way I could be prepared for the journey ahead. Whether that was for transportation or proper gear, it lets newer players know that every situation is going to be different. For example, my character is mid-20s, and I almost died to Thelsa Dral, who's over 10 levels beneath me. If I had come prepared with the right potions, scrolls, and or gear, namely something to ward off the paralysis, I think I wouldn't have had as much trouble as I did. The Shrine Sergeant's missions taught me to think about the task ahead and to prepare accordingly, as you never know what you might come up against, even as a high-level player. The next set of missions are certainly a far cry off from Kay's, but I will tell you this, they certainly don't disappoint. There are a lot of rumors and hearsay that surround the 9th Divine, Talos. Talos Stormcrown, Tiber Septim, Hjalti Earlybeard. He goes by a couple of different names depending on who you ask. Some say that he alone ascended to godhood. Others believe that his spirit combined with 3 others in order to become the 9th Divine. Then, there are a select few that think Talos was a fraud and that he's no god nor saint. There's also a lot of uncertainty regarding his origins, upbringing, and rise to power. The history books say one thing, but a large group of people believe an entirely different story. Some versions are steeped in mystery and paint Tiber Septim as a scheming murderer. Meanwhile, others detail his actions as heroic, and they put him on the pedestal that was set up by the Empire. It's hard to know what's real and what isn't without experiencing the timeline for ourselves. However, with that being said, there is one experience in Morrowind that, while it doesn't shed light on Talos' origins, it does help us understand the type of ruler/divine he's become. For those who don't know, it's heavily believed that the Nerevarine has a run-in with Tiber Septim during the events of the Elder Scrolls 3, and in the end, it ties back in with the Imperial cult. Now, in order for this event to even happen, the player must be far into the main questline. In fact, it's right after completing the quests, Hortator and Nerevarine, and right before starting the citadels of the 6th house. As the player marches on to Red Mountain, they first need to stop at the Ghost Gate. This Almsivi monument is located a short way southeast of Aldru. Heading on through the doors, if the player makes their way into the Tower of Dusk, they'll see something out of the ordinary. Most of the NPCs in here are buoyant armigers. Others are healers from the temple, and a select few offer services such as bartering and trading. The common theme is that every NPC here is a Dark Elf. So, it comes off strange to see an elderly Imperial standing around in Legion armor, especially all the way up in these parts. Maybe he came from Fort Buckmoth, but he'd have no business being here by Red Mountain. Choosing to approach him, I can see that the Legionnaire's name is Wolf. Furthermore, speaking with the grizzled veteran, he introduces himself and asks why I've come out to Ghostgate. As an aside, I'm going to be heavily focusing on Wolf's dialogue here, so I'm going to be reiterating a lot of what he said in this conversation. Now, back to it, the Legionnaire comments on how brutal of a place this can be, and from here, I have the option to reveal my true quest, or to keep my cards close to my chest. Choosing the former, Wolf gets all excited to hear about my mission. He says that he's an old veteran, about as old as Uriel Septim himself. The Legionnaire ventured this far into Morrowind, but can't go any further. He's old and he's tired. The Legionnaire asks that I kindly take his lucky old coin from him and carry it all the way to Dagoth. Wolf says that it's symbolic of the old hero that he used to be. Agreeing to take the coin, the Legionnaire is incredibly grateful. He says that he's had it for quite some time now, but believes that it's time to pass it on to someone new. Someone who's younger and can have an impact on Tamriel. Someone who can shape the continent's history and engineer their destiny. Wolf promises that the coin will bring me good luck and says for Emperor and Empire. At this point, there's only one more relevant dialogue prompt with the NPC. By inquiring about the quote, poor old Emperor, Wolf goes on about Uriel Septim. The Emperor is getting older, and no one really knows how much time he has left. Wolf then says the same thing about the Empire as a whole. For the most part, he thinks that the Third Empire has had a positive influence on Tamriel. It's united the provinces under one banner. However, at this point, Wolf thinks that it could be time for a change. Something that's new and young. He's unsure of what that change is though, or how it could be done. That's something he wants to leave up to the player, a newer generation. In the end, he cites that whatever it is, it could be messy, as a change like that is never pretty. Beyond those prompts, Wolf just directs the player to various NPCs at the Ghost Gate, and that's about it. By looking into his lucky coin, it actually gives me the greater power known as Luck of the Emperor. Once a day, I can cast it, and it fortifies my luck attribute by 20 points for 120 seconds. The conversation with Wolf was certainly interesting. Right now, you just assume that he's an experienced Legionnaire who's helping you with your journey. From here, the player can continue with their quest and venture beyond the Ghost Gate in search of their destiny. Once all is said and done, and you come back to the Tower of Dusk, you'll notice that Wolf is gone. The grizzled war veteran is nowhere to be found. However, from here, things only get stranger. By speaking with any of the NPCs at the Ghost Gate and asking about Wolf, they'll have no idea who you're talking about. None of them remember ever seeing him around here. They don't remember a man fitting his description, and in fact, an Imperial Legionnaire hasn't been around these parts in a really long time. You'd think that multiple NPCs within the Tower of Dusk's common area would have seen him. He was in plain sight for all to see, and he was there for a decent amount of time. However, maybe this could be chalked up to some weird pride thing amongst the Armigers, or even some practical joke, right? Well, maybe not. The final portion of this quest ties back into the Imperial cult. The cult's base of operations is in Ebonheart, and one of their highest ranking members is Lalatia Varian. Varian is an oracle, and while that comes with experience and knowledge, it also comes with visions and prophecies. By speaking with her, she's one of the few NPCs in the game who has Wolf as a dialogue option. Telling her the tale and what I've experienced, she offers an explanation, albeit it's a little far-fetched. She pieces together some of the key points from the story, marked by good fortune, luck of the Emperor, no one else seeing him, an old coin, and Wolf's face resembling the depictions of Tiber Septim. Even Lalatia knows it sounds crazy, but she believes that the player's been visited by an avatar of Tiber Septim. The Divine has reappeared in Tamriel in human form to deliver a message. Lalatia's last words are that she believes this is a sign of great doom. With that, the journal updates and the quest ends. Really, the only aftermath to the lucky coin is while speaking to Imperial Legionnaires. When the latest rumors are brought up, it's apparent that word is spread fast of the player's encounters. All of the soldiers are in awe. They ask a whole bunch of questions, like if he was a person or a ghost, did he speak with you, and is it all true? Unfortunately, there's no way to answer back or to develop the conversation further. So it ends there, and that puts a hard stop to the quest. The lucky coin is an easy thing to miss. There's a very brief window for the player to meet Wolf. Furthermore, if you miss him or flat out ignore him, you'd be none the wiser on his alleged purpose in the game. Not to mention, you have to seek out Lalatia Varian and willingly ask her about Wolf to get that last bit of dialogue. The developers didn't shove Wolf in our faces, and they left his role in the game as a bit of a mystery. This is very reminiscent of another NPC that's featured in the game, moreover in the Tribunal DLC. Enno Ramari, the founder of the End of Times cult, has made some claims that could be connected to Wolf's. Enno believes that the world is going to end in hellfire. The Daedra are going to open Oblivion Gates, and they're going to attack Tamriel. This is obviously the plot to the next game in the series, and many believe that this was foreshadowing put in by Bethesda. Well, I'd like to think that a lot of Wolf's dialogue was potential foreshadow as well. Wolf talks about Emperor Uriel's Septim and how he doesn't have much time left. At the start of Oblivion, Uriel's Septim dies, and so do almost all of his heirs. Wolf then talks about how the Empire as a whole should change and that the world would benefit from something new. At the end of Oblivion, the entire Septim dynasty dies out, forcing said change. Plus, the Fourth Era is ushered in. Tiber Septim's reign is what started the Third Era. It's only fitting that as soon as his family lineage dies out, the next age of Tamriel begins. There's also Lelatia Varian saying that this is a sign of great doom laid upon us by the gods. Whether this is the modern take on the word doom, referring to destruction or a terrible fate, or it's the older definition, meaning judgment or destiny, it all relates to the same thing, the Oblivion Crisis. It likely refers to the Daedric invasion, the Emperor's passing, and the end of the Third Era. The gods that Varian refers to could be the Divines, as Akatosh plays a role in saving Nirn, or it could be the Daedric princes, as Mehrunes Dagon is leading the invasion. Either way, I believe it's all relative, and it's all a foreshadow for the next installment in the series. Obviously, with Morrowind being a very old game, and it having successors like Oblivion and Skyrim, this isn't really a revolutionary idea or novel thinking. I think the most intriguing part to all of this is that it allegedly comes from Tiber Septim himself, the founder of the Third Empire and the conqueror of Tamriel. Before I get into that, let's quickly try to answer the question. Is Wolf actually an avatar of Tiber Septim? Well, I don't think anyone can say with absolute certainty. It does seem probable that Wolf was an aspect of Talos. Even Lelatia is hesitant to suggest such a thing, but looking at the evidence, Wolf wasn't an ordinary man. No one else at the Ghost Gate saw or knew about him. He appeared and disappeared without a trace. He was dressed like a legionnaire, but according to the Armigers, an Imperial soldier hasn't been to the Ghost Gate in a long time. Wolf wasn't a living, breathing man. He was some kind of supernatural phenomenon, but that doesn't automatically place him as Hjalti Earlybeard. If anything, what makes me tip the scales in favor of him actually being an aspect of Tiber Septim are the context clues. He was, quote, as old as the Emperor himself, he looked like the face on the back of the Septim, and all he really wanted to talk about was the Third Empire. Again, it's not concrete, but it's the best we get. It's a bizarre and strange occurrence, but stranger things have happened in Tamriel. So with that out of the way, why is what Wolf says to the player so intriguing? Well, most of what Wolf talks about is change. He tells the player that it's time the world switches things up, out with the old and in with the new. While Talos never says that he regrets his actions, he admits that all things must come to an end. It's time for the Third Empire to either be retired or get completely reworked. Essentially, Tiber Septim is turning his back on his legacy. Not in a bad way, but in a way that just makes sense. In most cases, you'd expect someone of his status and nature to be proud of his accomplishments. You'd think he'd be stubborn in his ways and that he'd ask his successors and followers to simply try harder and to do better. But in reality, it ends up almost being the opposite. He's still happy with the Third Empire's work, but he recognizes that the world is a different place now. The Tamriel that he conquered all those years ago isn't the same continent that it is now. The world has different problems and there are different people in it. Talos is able to recognize that old solutions won't solve current issues. For the continent to thrive, change is necessary. The land and its people have to evolve with the times. Now, did Talos want Uriel's Septim to die the way that he did in Oblivion, and for the Septim lineage to end? Probably not, but it was fate. Did he want Mehrunes Dagon and Mankar Cameron to storm the land in hopes of conquering it? No, but again, it was fate. Did he want the Third Empire to continue on with Titus Mede, a different ruler with different ideals? Who knows, but ultimately, it was destined to happen. Essentially, to wrap everything up, even after death, even after becoming a divine and literally rising above the mortals of Nirn, Talos is still looking out for Tamriel. His life's work was uniting the continent, and when the provinces are just as shaky as they used to be, Tiber Septim knows what unites the world best: a threat to its existence. He likely appeared before the Neverine as he was watching over your quest. Talos knew that Dagothr was not only a threat to Morrowind, but to Tamriel as a whole. While he can't interfere with destiny, he can give the player a blessing, aka the lucky old coin. As for the events of Oblivion, again, there wasn't anything he could do or say, as it would interfere with fate. The only thing he could really say was that change was necessary and a new world was imminent. I'd love to know your thoughts on this quest, Wolf, and Wolf's message down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring. Strange encounters to the side for now, I wanted to revert back to guild matters and go through all of Euless Trupter's assignments for Vvardenfell's Imperial cult. Euless is in charge of the Almoner missions. That means all of his quests surround collecting donations. Some of these tasks are very straightforward, while others are a little more complex. There are 7 quests, and like most storylines, they ramp up the more you get into it. Euless Trupter could be found in the lower levels of the Imperial chapels, right next to Sinuli and Tunifus. Speaking with the Savant, he introduces himself as well as the work that he does. He calls it fundraising work, and asks if I'm ready to begin. Telling him yes, I'd like to hop on to some of the Almoner projects, he gives me my first job. Euless would like for me to visit the Skyrim mission here in Ebonheart and ask for donations. The goal is 100 gold, and Trupter thinks it should be relatively easy to hit, as the Nords are usually open to giving. Sounding simple enough, I left the chapels in search of the Skyrim mission. To be honest, this was a pretty easy one. However, I did learn a few things in the process. Number 1, I learned that there was a sub-faction in Ebonheart named the Skyrim Mission. They're really just the Nordic embassy to Vvardenfell, but still, I had no clue they even existed. The second thing I learned was how the first few quests in the story were structured. Chatting with all of the Nords in their compound, none of them really offered new or engaging dialogue. Asking each one for alms, they happily handed over a handful of septims. 5 gold here, 40 gold there. However, there's always a fat cat, so to speak. Someone who will hand over the most, if not all of the required donation. For example, Haedmir at the Skyrim mission gladly donated 100 gold, the cult's target goal to begin with. Now, lesson number 3 is that if I had bothered to raise their dispositions, each Nord would have donated double their original amount. This is relevant because returning to Euless and reporting in, there are several dialogue options. The 2 that progress the quest are telling him that I reached the goal or that I doubled the goal. I definitely didn't raise enough funds to double it, but I had the option to say so anyways. That's what leads me into the final lesson. For most of Euless's quests, you can actually donate the gold out of your own pocket. So technically, you can just sit in front of Trupter and steamroll through 5 of the 7 quests rather easily. Obviously, I won't do that, but it certainly is an option. As a reward for doubling the donations, Euless gives me high praise and hands me an enchanted item called Shoes of Conviction. The Shoes of Conviction fortify my personality for 10 points for 20 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, Alms from the Skyrim mission. Chatting with Euless again, I asked him for my next job. This time, the Savant wanted me to seek out the Argonian mission here in Ebonheart and receive a 100 gold donation from them. Trupter warns me though that it might not be as easy as the Skyrim mission. Black March isn't as rich. Even though the Argonians are generous folk, it could be tricky to hit the mark. First, I learned that there's a Nordic embassy in Ebonheart, and now I'm learning there's an Argonian embassy here too. The more you play, I guess. The Argonian Hall is right beside the Nords. Having just done this with the previous quest, I figured it would be a breeze. Well, while it wasn't the same mechanics as the previous one. In fact, something the Almoner questline does quite well is that it tries to keep the mechanics and features as fresh as possible. Nothing is cookie cutter or copy and paste. Speaking with several of the Argonians here and asking for alms, they all said that I had to talk with their leader, Imkalea, as they can't help me. So, finding him and asking for a donation, he rebuttals with a very good point. Imkalea says that the Argonians respect the Imperial cult. However, they're disappointed in the cult's lack of action. The cult has never supported the Argonians by speaking out against Morrowind's slavery and inhumane actions towards their people. Taking that into account, Imkalea apologizes and says that unfortunately, the Argonian mission can't make any donations at the moment. Like I said, a very good point. but you know what gets around it: illusion and artificial charms. Raising Imkalea's disposition and trying again, this time he changes his mind. He's still disappointed at the cult's inaction, but flips the ideology of donating on its head. By giving a handsome sum, Imkalea is demonstrating that him and his people are committed to bettering the local communities. This is in an effort to disprove the Dark Elves and their insistence that the Argonians are no more than animals. Imkalea hands over 200 gold and smashes the donation target out of the park. Now, interestingly, I had no idea this part was tied to the quest. I thought I had just stumbled onto a scene I wasn't supposed to, which is still technically true. There's one other pathway in the Argonian mission. It's a door that leads down into its depths. Here, there's another NPC named Endice, and just past her, there's a flooded area of the hallway. The water is guarded by 2 slaughterfish, no doubt meant to keep the common man out. Defeating them and continuing on my trek, the path eventually leads to a cell door. On the other side is a lone Argonian. Unlocking the door and speaking with the NPC, Onwan, the plot thickens. Onwan says that she's afraid, she's hiding, and that I can't tell anyone. When alms for the poor is brought up, Juan says that she's a runaway slave, and that she's waiting for a boat to take her away from these lands. This gives the player a journal update, and this information can actually be used to blackmail Imkalea into giving the cult its donation. He says that someone else must have brought Onwan here and disregarded the laws of this land, but it's more than likely an organized effort. In any case, 200 gold in hand, I returned to the Imperial chapels and reported to Ulyss. Telling him that I doubled the goal, he rewarded me with an enchanted item called Zenithar's Frock. Zenithar's Frock is an enchanted shirt, and it fortifies Mercantile for 5 points for 50 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, Alms from the Argonian mission. Resuming the conversation with Ulyss, he gives me my next job. Trupter says that Fort Buckmoth hasn't hit their mark for collection. These donations are going to be used for purchasing food and supplies for the less fortunate. He urges me to head to Aldrun and to ask around for some more handouts, again with a goal of 100 gold, but we all know that 200 is the real mark. Before leaving, the Savant says that this job in particular could be tricky. Since Aldrun is ran by House Redoran, the Dunmer there might not be so compassionate towards the Empire. Well, Ulyss is right on one thing. It seems like the Imperial Shrine has some competition. Heading to Aldrun, pretty much all of the Dunmer there say the same thing, that they already donated to the temple. In theory, the temple and the cult are both trying to do the same thing, but each faction more so focuses on their own people and followers. Heading to the temple, even the NPCs inside of there say that they've already given their dues. So, this is where the quest gets pretty interesting. Basically, my objective was to find every single non-Dunmer NPC and ask them for donations. Even by doing that, a fair bit of them just responded by saying that they couldn't help me. Essentially, the 4 places that yielded the best results were the Rat in the Pot, Alderscrolls, the Mages Guild, and the Fighters Guild. There were a handful of NPCs in each establishment that were more than willing to help out with the cause. The issue though, and not to sound greedy, was that most of them were only giving 1 gold piece. If I was lucky, I'd get 5, and if I was on top of the world, I'd get 10. Eventually, it felt like I had collected donations from every able-bodied NPC, and yet I was still shy at least 100 gold. Well, even though I touched on it before, this was where I actually found out that increasing everyone's disposition meant more money in my hands. What's more, once an NPC is donated, you can't go back and increase their disposition to get the remaining balance out of them. Once the dialogue option's been exhausted, that's it. I also didn't want to pay the difference out of pocket on this one. So I reverted my save and this time did things a little more strategically. Since 200 was the goal, I just paid a visit to the NPCs with the biggest pockets. For starters, Aingoth the Jeweler in the Rat in the Pot donated 60 gold, so that was a huge chunk taken care of. Then there was also Lyriel Stoin who forked over 20 septims. Perseus Mercius and Baradris at the Fighters Guild each donated 20 gold too. For the Mages Guild, Edwina Elbert handed over another 20. I also just collected 5 gold from Erinil as she was convenient to get to. Then, the remainder came from various shopkeepers and random NPCs, like Cien Sintiev, the alchemist, Codus Colonus, the bookseller, and Hoki of the Morak Tong. Honestly, this quest was pretty fun for me. It felt like a neat scavenger hunt, and while Morrowind does a great job at not holding your hand, I felt this was an exemplary quest for that. Once all 200 gold was collected, I returned to the Imperial chapels and spoke with Trupter. For going above and beyond, Euless rewarded me with 2 scrolls and a skill book. Dedala's Knack charms the target for 0 to 24 points for 30 seconds, Figgy's Gem Feeder soul traps the target for 60 seconds, and the buying game increases the reader's mercantile skill. With that, thus ends the quest, Buckmoth Alms. Resuming the conversation with Euless, he got straight into the next quest. For the upcoming Harvest's End pageant, the savant needs to acquire a red shirt with a black vest. This clothing piece is apparently just called a common shirt. In any case, Trupter would like me to ask around the local shops and to see if any of the shopkeepers would be willing to donate one. He suggests that I try cities and towns that have more of a Cyrodiilic influence, so Balmora, Caldera, Pelagiad, or Vivec's Foreign Quarter. It's at this point that the Almoner questline temporarily steps away from monetary donations. While I don't know a whole lot about the Harvest's End pageant, surely a common shirt could be expensed by the cult. They don't need me destroying some poor guy's business in hopes of having everything handed to them for free. Something interesting to note too is that similar to the previous quests, the player can either just go and outright buy a common shirt, or if they find one in the wild or had one on their person to begin with, Trupter would be more than happy to accept it. However, the hunt and chase are the meat and potatoes of this questline, so I figured I'd start my search in Balmora. Locating the clothiers and asking Millie Hastian about the common shirt, she says that she has nothing in that style. However, an Altmer named Falinamo apparently does, and his shop is located in Caldera. Heading to the mining town and seeking out the High Elf, I asked again about the shirt and vest. Let's just say, Falinamo wasn't really in the giving mood. He rhetorically asked if the Imperial cult was too poor to pay him for his work. That's what I was saying too, but hey, we're all about handouts and free things at the faction. Rubbing my hands together, I charmed Falinamo and tried again. Surprise, surprise, this time he was a lot nicer and more generous. He comments on how the common shirt is one of his favorite styles, and how he's fallen for my compliments. The Altmer freely hands over the outfit, and even supplies an extra one, plus some tailored trousers. The tailored trousers are actually an enchanted leg piece. They fortify the wearer's personality by 3 points. With the quest item in hand, I returned to Euless and reported my success. This is also the first Almoner quest where there's no bonus reward, as the common shirt was the be-all end-all. I guess though you could count Falinamo's added items as your reward for seeking out a donation, as opposed to just paying for them. Now, as a reward from the cult, Trupter hands me a book called A Dance and Fire, Chapter 7. A Dance and Fire is a mercantile skill book. With that, thus ends the quest, Shirt and Vest for Harvest's End. Resuming my conversation with Euless, I asked him for my next job. The savant tells me that the Balmora Shrine is planning some sort of fundraiser at Fort Moonmoth. They've already been able to secure enough food donations, but they've been lacking in the drinks department. Trupter would like for me to secure 5 bottles of Cyrodiilic brandy. Apparently, those attending the party won't settle for anything less than that caliber of drink. They especially don't want anything that the Dunmer brew, grief being one of said spirits. Euless suggests that I try asking around the corner clubs in Balmora, as they have some close ties with the Empire and the cult. Again, what I really like about the Almoner quests is that they keep evolving. Yes, they're fetch quests, they started out really simple, but now they've turned into more elaborate scavenger hunts. It requires talking with the right people and rubbing elbows with the right NPCs. It's quickly become my favorite story arc within the Imperial cult. Heading to Balmora, the first place I went to was the Council Club. Knowing the reputation of this place and that it's frequented by the Kimona Tong, I knew there was a slim chance they'd actually donate to the cause. Lo and behold, I was right. Asking the proprietor, Banor Saren, for donations, he mocked me and the cult and told me to get lost. Even after raising his disposition, he said it a little nicer, but he still rejected my request. Little did I know though that wouldn't be my last time in the Council Club for this mission. In any case, I continued my search by moving to the next establishment, the Lucky Lockup. Coming out the gates by charming Benonius Agrodilius, he reluctantly handed me a bottle of Cyrodiilic brandy. He said what I've been saying all along, that he's being robbed of his profits and comforts, and that the Imperial cult probably has enough money to spare for the bottles. However, that's 1 down and just 4 more to go. The next spot I tried was the 8 plates. Charming Delena Relal and asking for a handout, she recognized that it was a smart move to get into the cult's good graces. You never know when you may need the goodwill of the faction. She donated a bottle to the fundraiser, and that was 1 more ticked off the list. At this point though, I recognized that there was only one more tavern in town that I had to visit. Unless they were going to donate 3 bottles, which I didn't think they would, I wondered where the final 2 were going to come from. Well, entering the South Wall Corner Club and speaking with the proprietor, Bacula Clausius, he ends up handing me 1 bottle. He apparently has 2, but he needs the other one for the bar. Before I can even go and scratch my head, Bacula offers up a suggestion on where I could find the remaining 2. Banner Saren at the Corner Club, the rude Dunmer from earlier, apparently has a Cyrodiilic brandy stashed away in the storage room beside the bar. While Clausius feels bad to suggest theft, it's apparently common knowledge that the Corner Club is frequented by the Kimona Tong, and they've got what's coming to them. As we've learned, the Imperial cult really doesn't care where the donated goods come from, they just want them. So, taking Bacula's advice, I re-entered the Corner Club and snuck around to their storage room. Closing the door behind me, one of the crates did indeed have 5 bottles of brandy. That's more than enough for the cult, and in fact, if I had started with this, I could have been done already. Taking the bottles, I recall to the shrine and report it to Ulyss. Trupter recognizes that this wasn't an easy task, so he gives me a pretty hefty reward. The left and right hands of Zenithar. They're both enchanted gloves. The right hand fortifies the wearer's personality for 5 points, and the left hand fortifies their luck for 5 points as well. With that, thus ends the quest, Brandy for the fundraising dinner. Chatting with Ulyss again, we got straight into the next job. Trupter says that Cunius Pelelius, a higher-up in the Caldera Mining Company, has pledged to make donations to the cult. However, said donations have never actually been made. His contributions would go a long way for the shrine, as they'd go towards the Widows and Orphans Fund, aka Ulyss's brothel and tavern money. Just kidding, possibly. But the goal for this one is 500 drakes. That's certainly a decent amount. Cunius can be found at the Governor's Hall, and the Savant would like for me to make haste. According to further conversation with Ulyss, Pelelius is part of an exclusive group that received the Imperial Charter to set up operations in the Ebony Mine. This is a very lucrative option, and while 500 gold may seem like a lot, it's but a drop in the bucket for the Caldera Mining Company. Every time a missionary is sent from the shrine, Cunius just blows them off and says that he's very busy. Trupter thinks that this is all a ruse to get the cult off of his back, but Pelelius doesn't know how insistent the faction can be. At this point, there are only 2 quests left for the Imperial Shrine. Up until now, there's been a bit of detective work required for each quest, but in my opinion, these next 2 missions are where the investigative skills really shine. Heading to the town of Caldera and into the Governor's Hall, Cunius Pelelius can be found wandering around the main chamber. Speaking with him, he introduces himself but immediately follows it with a dismissive and rude line. He's unsure why someone like myself thinks that they have business with someone like him. Already off to a good start, I asked about his 500 drake donation. Almost as if it was rehearsed, he said that at the moment he's incredibly busy, but once his affairs are sorted, he'd be open to discussing it at a later date. From here, I have a few options. One is to thank him for his time and leave. Another is to press him for a commitment. Doing so, he says that my quote, views are unwelcome here, and that we'll pick this up at a later date. The third option is to demand the money right here and now, but this apparently causes Cunius to attack the player, and that's not where I wanted to go with this. Instead, I'm choosing to extort the poor fellow. Asking around the Governor's Hall, no one really has anything to say regarding the donation. They just all tell you to take it up with Pelelius. However, when the topic of Cunius himself is brought up, everyone gets hush-hush. They're all afraid to say what's on their mind, but they do direct me to someone named Olumba Groboglar. Olumba is apparently an open book, and seeking him out, he shares some pretty juicy rumors. Apparently, Cunius has gotten into some money troubles, likely some problems with balancing the books. In order to pay off said debts, he's been skimming from the mines and smuggling raw ebony. The only witnesses are the slaves who perform the labor there, but they might not be so open to sharing what they've seen. Either way, with a lead to follow, I shot straight for the mining camp. Out of curiosity, I tried asking the workers there, but they all said that they'd hate to make an enemy out of Cunius Pelelius. I then tried asking some of the slaves in the shacks, like Delina and Cassina, but they chose to be silent on the topic. So, heading into the mines themselves, I located an Argonian by the name of Gilm. Asking Gilm about the smuggling and Cunius, she too chose not to reveal anything. However, after raising her disposition, the Argonian began to talk. Gilm said that it was all true. Cunius comes at night and takes from the deposits. Everyone's seen him do it too, but they're all afraid to speak out against him. With a solid confession, I returned to the governor's hall and confronted Pelelius with this accusation. This time there were a few more dialogue prompts. One of them was to threaten him with the skimming, and the other was to bring up the slave's confession. Choosing the latter, it was enough to scare Cunius into submission. Realizing what was going on here, Pelelius gave in to the blackmail and handed me 3 samples of raw ebony. While he may not have the gold at the moment, he thinks that the ebony can fetch a decent price, and it'll be more than the pledged 500 gold donation. Now, this next part ultimately depends on the player's personality, mercantile skill, and the trader's disposition. It is possible to sell each one for their estimated value of 200 gold, but you have to work the markets a bit, or else it comes out of your own pocket. Now, quickly reverting back, there is one other option for completing this quest, and it's a lot quicker than getting a confession. Back at the governor's hall, on the 2nd floor, there's a little side room that contains a locked chest belonging to Odril Helvi. If this chest sounds familiar, that's because it was related to a quest from the House Redoran storyline. And guess what? The secret Caldera ledger is the exact same quest item. Cracking it open, the book simply says that a lot of the money is going to something called the Ashlands Management Fund. Whatever that is, it's not sanctioned by the Duke of Vardenfell. Bringing this ledger to Cunius, the exact same dialogue ensues. He gives in to the player's blackmail and hands you 3 samples of raw ebony to sell. Whichever method is chosen, once the 500 gold has been secured, it's time to recall back to the Imperial chapels. Speaking with Ulyss, he was ecstatic at my accomplishment. Many before me have failed, so that's what he uses to justify this pretty generous reward. Trupter gifts me 6 different scrolls. Elevrim's Sty blinds the target for 0 to 50% for 30 seconds. Lord Maz's Revenge conjures a complete set of bound armor for 60 seconds. Savage Might fortifies strength for 1 to 30 points for 60 seconds. The Gambler's Prayer fortifies luck for 15 to 45 points for another 60 seconds. Alvusia's Warping dispels 100 to 200% in 1 foot on touch, and Black Despair damages willpower for 5 to 15 points for 10 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest. Donation from Cunius Pelelius. Chatting with Ulyss once more, he gave me my final task as an almoner. Someone by the name of Canctunian Ponius of the East Empire Company has promised to sponsor an Ashlander mission. The cult needs at least a 1,000 septim donation, as it will be a pretty expensive expedition. Even though Ponius pledged the money, the cult hasn't received anything. This isn't like Canctunian though, as he's a man of faith and of his word. Trupter wants me to seek him out in the East Empire Company's office here in Ebonheart and to personally ask for the donation. As I said before, this is the final quest for the Almoner section, so you know it's going to be exceptional. I will say though, without trying to spoil anything, I felt as though the last one was a bit more challenging. However, if the player has been paying out of pocket to steamroll through this questline, 1,000 gold is where it gets pretty steep, so it may not be the wisest choice to do so here. Heading into the EEC's office, I located Ponius in the back room and spoke with him. He introduced himself as the Factor-in-Chief and asked if I was here regarding the generous pledge. Telling him yes, Canctunian confides in me and tells me the truth. He can't keep his pledge at the moment because recently, one of the EEC's clerks embezzled funds. In order to avoid a scandal, Ponius is keeping it hush-hush, and he's been reimbursing the company out of his own pocket. From here, I have 2 options. The first is to thank him for his time and walk away. This could be in order to just pay the 1,000 donation out of my pocket to Ulyss. That way, I'd be done with this story arc. The other option is to offer my help with tracking down the clerk who stole the money. Wanting to see this quest through, I of course chose the latter. Ponius gladly accepts the offer and offers me details in return. The thief's name is Bosanin. He's a high elf and he stole about 3,000 septims. Before he stole the funds, Bosanin was apparently showing up less and less for work. While Canctunian wasn't all that close with him, he suggests that I ask the other staff members for further details, as they all work together. The first NPC I tried was the orc Shazgob Groluzgan. Luzgan was more than willing to tell me about Bosanin. He was apparently hardworking at first, but just like that, the Altmer became unreliable. Rumor has it that the High Elf frequently visited the Mages Guild in the foreign quarter of Vivec. At first, no one knew how he could afford teleporting so often, but now it all makes sense. The other NPC I chatted with was the Argonian, Oakenshay. Shay's details are a little different to Luzgan's. The Argonian believed that Mosannon had a Telvanni girlfriend. He kept their relationship a secret, but Oakenshay has seen them from time to time in the foreign quarter of Vivec. From here, there are a couple of leads to follow. First and foremost, it's time to head to Vivec, more specifically the Mages Guild. Then I should start thinking about a Telvanni woman and where she might reside. It could be the Telvanni canton, or it could be one of their eastern villages. Within the Mages Guild, I was able to speak with someone named Malvin Ramori and ask about Mosannon. She said that he was in here not long ago, and he sought out the guild guide Flacasia Faucius. Heading to Flacasia, she then says that Mosannon frequently teleports between here and the Wolverine Hall. Plus, he's been spotted with a Telvanni woman on numerous occasions. So, heading to the hall myself, I spoke with someone named Ariel Fanil, and she gave me the final lead. She said that a high elf has been teleporting around with the Sadrith Mora local Volmini Dral. She has a house near the hall. Interestingly, I guess Oakenshay's description stood out to her, as she goes out of her way to call Dral young but not very attractive, whatever that's worth. Leaving the hall, there are only a couple of pods near the fort, and lo and behold, one of them is Volmini Dral's. Entering her home, the Dunmer was standing near the doorway. Chatting with her, I immediately asked about Mosannon. Fortunately, Dral was very brief and forthcoming. She says that the Altmer lives here with her, and that they're, quote, very close friends. Somebody ought to relay that to Mosannon. We'll see what he does with the money then. Ascending the stairs, I finally laid eyes on the man of the hour, Mosannon himself. Speaking with him, he asks what I want, and I get straight into it. Bringing up the embezzled funds, the Altmer comes clean. He says that he took the money, because he thought that Volmini would like him more if he was rich. He's since found out that that isn't the case. Again, somebody ought to tell him that he's in the friend zone. However, Mosannon has already spent 500 septums of the stolen money. He's able to pay back 2,500 gold, but needs time to make up the remainder. The High Elf pleads with me not to say anything to Ponius regarding his whereabouts, as he'll be arrested and separated from Volmini. Here, I have a few options. One is to demand the gold and make no promises. 2 is to make the promise and take the money. And 3 is to back out to consider the offers. Choosing 1, because I wanted to tattle on this man so bad, I asked for the money and told him I couldn't make any promises. Since Mosannon's disposition was high enough, this option worked. He recognized that he was in no place to make demands, and he just asked that I consider his situation. With 2,500 gold in hand, I recalled to Ebonheart and brought it to the EEC office. Chatting with Ponius about the embezzled funds, I have the options to lie about how much I received and to only hand him a portion of the recovered money. However, choosing to just give him the full 2,500, Canctunian was saddened to see the full amount couldn't be recovered. Yet, he was able to cut his losses and still hand over the pledged 1,000 drakes. Taking the donation back to Euless, the savant thanks me for all that I've done and rewards me with something called Zenithar Whispers. Trupter says that he has no more work for me, and he tells me to look to the shrine sergeants and lay healers. He also says that if I'm up for it, I should seek out Lalatia Varian, as she has oracle quests for me to do. As for Mosannon and his little secret, he lucked out. I couldn't get the dialogue option to rat on him, so for now, he stays smitten with his partner. Finally, Zenithar Whispers is an enchanted amulet, and it charms the target for 30 points for 5 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, pledged from Canctunian Ponius, and that wraps up all of the Almoner missions. Overall, I enjoyed Euless Trupter's story arc. Obviously, these were all variations of fetch quests, and I know a lot of people aren't that into them. Normally, I'm not either, but as the quests went on and started to develop more story and life to them, I started to get more hooked. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that the quests that are done really well and don't have violence attached to them are some of my favorites. In a world based around plundering, looting, and killing, it's nice to see the other side from time to time. The, quote, corporate world of Tamriel, if you will. The world of negotiations, deals, promises, bargains, mystery, investigation. When done properly, it's all very interesting, and to me, surpasses the standard dungeon crawl. While the lay healer storyline was all about alchemy and restoration, and the shrine sergeants dealt with combat and adventure, the Almoners were all about speechcraft, persuasion, and charm. It's something that you see more of in Morrowind than the other Elder Scrolls titles, but that's just because Morrowind does it so well. All in all, at this point, the Almoner storyline is my favorite, but who knows, that could easily change with the Oracle quests, as those are up next. Now, the final story arc for the cult belongs to Lalatia Varian. Lalatia's quests are the only ones in the faction that require the player to be a certain rank. Varian only has 5 missions to give out, and while it's the least for any of the faction's quest givers, they're arguably some of the best that the cult has to offer. Plus, the rewards for this story arc are top tier compared to all of the others. Like the rest of the Imperial cult's leaders, Lalatia Varian can be found in the Imperial chapels. As it stands, she's one of the few members who's achieved the rank of Oracle. What's more, in order to even begin her set of quests, the player needs to have achieved the rank of Acolyte. Fortunately, that's only the third rank in the faction, and it can easily be hit by just going through one of the guild's other storylines. Approaching Varian by the shrine and speaking with her, she opens by introducing herself. Lalatia's claim to fame is that she's been granted with visions. She can see glimpses of scenes all across Vvardenfell. However, she's no capable warrior, nor is she an adventurer. Her skill set is best used to scry, and she doesn't like to venture outside of Ebonheart. That's where I come in. Lalatia says that she has need of a bold adventurer, someone who's willing to dedicate themselves to the Oracle quests. Varian promises riches and rewards that befit a servant of the Nine. In order to begin with such adventures, Lalatia makes me swear an oath to her. I must do as she says and when she says it. Only then will she reveal her visions and sights. Swearing to dedicate myself to the cause, Varian expresses her gratitude and her warmest welcomes to the cult's inner circle. Getting into the first task, the Oracle says that she's had a vision regarding a ring in darkness. Inquiring further, the Imperial says that this is the Ring of the Wind, an ancient treasure of Elsewhere, a piece that's sacred to the divine Kinnereth. Her description is a little cryptic, but she says that she also saw fire glaring in a dwarf's face and darkness on a ring of water. Varian suggests that I seek the counsel of a Dunmer savant or a scout, as they may know the meaning of said vision. She specifically calls out Lalam Dreedle in the Grand Council chambers and Elasa Sarathrin at the Elven Nations Corner Club. Before the conversation ends, Lalatia hands me a few scrolls to help out with the journey ahead. The quest has barely started, and already it seems like there's more to it than most of the other cult's missions. I suppose there's a reason that the player needs to be a slightly higher rank in order to begin them, and let me tell you, that skill jump is certainly noticeable. As per the Oracle's advice, I sought out Dreedle in the council chambers in order to hear his opinion. The savant could be found on the second floor of the fort, and speaking with him, he offered some decent insight on the Ring of the Wind. Lalam directed me to a place called Namu. It's a cavern in the wildlands of Sunagurudan, which is just west of the Daedric ruin Yansaramus. He says that there are several chambers in the cave that match the Oracle's vision. At the time, I assumed that both the scout and the savant would offer unique pieces of advice for my journey, so I went out of my way to find Elasa Sarathrin at the Elven Nations Corner Club. Unfortunately, it seems as though for now, their dialogue is the same, as she relayed the exact same information. However, that won't always be the case. Either way, with a lead and a destination marked on the map, I've made my way to the eastern side of Vvardenfell. Levitating past the Daedric ruins of Yansaramus and scanning the nearby cliffs, I managed to spot a small flat inlet. Having been around the block a few times, I figured that this is where I could find the entrance to Namu, and wouldn't you know it, I lucked out. Heading on inside, I was immediately spotted and aggroed onto by one of the cave's inhabitants. It turns out, Namu is home to a band of smugglers. There are 6 of them, and they range from level 9 all the way to level 16. They also have a variety of classes: archers, warriors, nightblades, battle mages, etc. As I've said in the past, it's always worth it to loot smuggler dens, as the treasures are not only valuable, but they can be incredibly useful as well. After some adventuring and battling, the pathway eventually leads to a peculiar area, a dim, circular chamber with water at its base. This was no doubt the Ring of Darkness that Lalatia saw. Following the narrow bridges and old staircases, I soon landed on the final smuggler, Galmus Dren. After defeating Dren in combat and checking his inventory, I finally came across the Ring of the Wind, an enchanted ring that fortifies the wearer's agility by 30 points. With the legendary artifact in my possession, it was time to leave this place. However, on my way out, I came across an even stranger sight. A lone NPC was wandering around the platforms, and he was not hostile. He was stripped of his belongings, minus his trousers and a pair of enchanted gloves. His name was John Hawker, and speaking with him, he claimed to be a traitor and was separated from his caravan. Hawker took refuge in Namu, but that's when Galmus Dren and his crew captured him and prepared him for the slave trade. He just wants to leave here, and in order to do so, he needs a scroll of divine intervention. Well, luckily for me, I just picked up a few from Varian at the start of this quest. Since I have the spell, I have no need for the scrolls. Handing one over, John thanked me profusely, and as a token of his gratitude, he gifted me all that he had left, his 2 enchanted gloves. Zenithar's warning demoralizes humanoids and creatures for 20 to 80 points for 10 seconds, silences for 10 seconds, and blinds for 5 to 25% on touch for another 10 seconds. Now, the other glove comes up as Xanthar's Wiles, which I imagine has to be a typo on the game's part. Regardless, Xanthar's Wiles charms the target for 1 to 50 points for 5 seconds. After our conversation, Hawker disappeared, seemingly using his Scroll of Divine Intervention. Figuring it's time for me to leave too, I recall to Ebonheart and reported to Lalatia. Interestingly, I have the options of either telling her about John Hawker or keeping it to myself and saying nothing more. Choosing the former though, Varian becomes astonished. She connects the dots between the encounter and the gloves and believes that I had a run-in with an avatar of Zenithar himself. She calls it very peculiar, but then jumps back to the matter at hand. Varian's thrilled to hear about the Ring of the Wind's recovery, and in fact insists that I keep it for the journeys ahead. She tells me to speak with her again when I'm ready for the next mission, and with that, thus ends the quest, Ring in Darkness. Resuming my conversation with Varian, she gets right into the next Oracle quest. Lalatia mentions that she's been granted a prophecy for the Boots of the Apostle. It's another coveted treasure, and it plays a great role in Cyrodiilic history. These are the boots that were once worn by Tiber Septim himself. Legend has it that as soon as Talos Stormcrown was finished with his training at High Hrothgar, he was seen floating down the mountain. It's believed that this was possible due to the boots. Through her vision, she heard this quote, "Through the doors of Berendis, within these silent caverns, beneath the wings of twilight, dust sleeps in the shoes that Talos wore." Beyond that, the priestess isn't sure what it means, and she suggests getting clarification from the savant or the scout once more. Doing so, I sought out Dral again, and he was very helpful with deciphering the prophecy. This Berendis she mentioned is an actual place. It's south of Nissus. As for the Wings of Twilight, Lalam believes that this is referring to Winged Twilights, the Daedric spawn that serve Azura. He believes that these creatures will be guarding the boots. I actually found this quest and its importance to be up there as one of my favorites. I'm genuinely fascinated by anything that has to do with Tiber Septim. Love him, hate him, like what he did for Tamriel, dislike his methods, whatever we may think, there's no denying that he's a central figure for the Elder Scrolls franchise. The Third Empire and a united Tamriel are often the backbones and underlying elements to these games' plots and universes. It's due to Tiber Septim that we have Uriel Septim. The conflicts between the Empire and the natives of Vardenfell are abundant all over Morrowind. Skyrim takes the Third Empire and puts them as one of the 2 warring factions within the land. I'll get back to the matter at hand now, but needless to say, Tiber Septim's lore, origins, and legacy will never not interest me. Reaching Nissus via Siltstrider and heading southwest, I landed on the stronghold of Berendis and went on inside. Berendis has 4 zones to it, and each one is patrolled by Daedric forces. These are certainly a level up from smugglers and spirits. However, the silver lining is that the loot they drop and the weapons they carry are most certainly an upgrade for lower level players. After a bit of adventuring and exploration, I soon landed on a doorway that led to the underground portion. Here, the stronghold leaked out into the earth and the Dunmer corridors turned into natural tunnels. After fighting my way through a handful more Daedra, I soon landed on a good sign, Winged Twilights. As the beasts flew at me from across the chamber, I could see that they were hovering over a corpse. What's more, the corpse had some eye-catching boots on. No doubt, those were the boots of the Apostle. Once the Harpies were defeated, I began wandering over to the corpse when all of a sudden, I noticed another point of interest. I could see a moving shadow on the ground just beside the dead body. While this is a minor bug, it revealed to me that there was a person standing on the platform above. So, first things first, I looked at the dead hero's inventory, and lo and behold, his shoes were the boots of the Apostle. When used, they give the wearer levitation for 30 to 40 points for 30 seconds on self. Hence, Tiber Septim riding the clouds as he descended from High Hrothgar. Now, the next thing was dealing with this strange NPC. Casting Levitate, I flew to the chamber ceiling and spotted a lone woman standing amongst some bones on one of the rocks. Speaking with her, her name was Amanin, and she was apparently dragged to this dungeon by the Winged Twilights and left stranded up here. She prayed to Mara for divine intervention, and similar to my encounter with John Hawker, I was able to give her one of my spare scrolls. Just before Amanin cast the spell, she gifted me Mara's skirt and blouse, the only items that she had left on her. The blouse grants the wearer with 10% magicka resistance, and the skirt grants the wearer with 5 extra points of health. All finished up in Barandis, I recalled to the Imperial chapels and reported to Lalatia. As a reward for my efforts and noble deeds, the Oracle allows me to keep the boots of the Apostle. She hopes that they continue to serve me while I carry out the will of the Nine. As for Amanin, Varian believes that she was an aspect of the goddess Mara. The divine wanted to test me and my faith. By passing said test, I was rewarded with her boons, similar to my encounter with Zenithar. Lalatia ends the conversation by saying that I should check in soon for my next assignment. With that, thus ends the quest, Boots of the Apostle. Resuming my conversation with Varian, she got right into my next task. This time, there wasn't any cryptic prophecy or mysterious vision. Lalatia spoke plain and simple. Another one of the cult's oracles, Adasamsi Asernararan, was sent to the Dunmer stronghold of Rothiran in hopes of recovering a relic called the Ice Blade of the Monarch. Varian believes that she was captured and that her life's in danger. She'd like me to head to Rothiran, which is in the southern region of Sheogorad, find Adasamsi, and recover the blade. According to further conversation, the blade's origins are quite interesting. It was created by an evil archmage known as Selmo of the Somerset Isles. Selmo gave the blade to a warrior named Thurgnar Assi in hopes that he'd use it to assassinate a king. Thurgnar tried, but was ultimately unsuccessful. The warrior died, Selmo was imprisoned, and the ice blade was recovered by some truly wicked people. According to legend, the blade is able to pass from owner to owner whenever it sees fit. Well, here's to hoping it wants to stay stashed away in my inventory. So far, I've really enjoyed my time going through Lalatia's quests. I found them to be fun and engaging. While standalone dungeon crawls and quick fetch quests aren't my favorite, the rewards have been really nice so far. Plus, the lore that accompanies each quest and item has been very intriguing. The Boots of the Apostle, the Ring of the Wind, Zenithar and Mara's boons all have relatively fascinating backstories, and it's interesting to think about what other things I'll encounter while out on this questline. Arriving at Dagon Fell, I levitated across the island and headed south towards the March stronghold. Soon, I landed at Rothiran and prepared myself for a battle. I could see some NPCs in the distance and thought for sure that they'd be hostile. Surprisingly though, they weren't. At this point, I was a little stumped as to what I was walking into. Either way, I cased the dungeon and landed on a doorway that led into the arena. Curious, I went on through, and that's when the fighting had started. There were several hostile NPCs down here. All 6 of them were Dunmer, their levels ranged from 6 to 15, and their classes were varied: sorcerers, bards, and witch hunters. Among them was an NPC named Laren Tirano. Tirano was the current owner of the Ice Blade of the Monarch, or rather the previous owner. It's a long 2-handed sword, can deal a max of 50 base damage, and has the enchantment of frost damage for 10 to 40 points for 1 second per hit. Interestingly, on Laren's person, he also had Adasamsi's robe, which paralyzes the target for 5 seconds, her ring, which grants the user with divine intervention, and a key to some slave cells. Once all of the threats were eliminated, I began opening the nearby cells in search of Adasamsi. Checking each one, I managed to locate the Oracle in the western room. Speaking with Adasamsi, she pleaded with me to free her. Laren Tirano, the Ice Blade's previous owner, was the one who orchestrated this whole thing. She believes that Tirano brainwashed her into forgetting how she got here, as the last thing she remembered was waking up in the cell stripped of all her clothes. Adasamsi asks me to bring her ring, as casting divine intervention is the fastest way out of here. Well, backing out of the conversation and reinitiating it, the Oracle takes the ring that I had already picked up and thanks me profusely. In an instant, Adasamsi is gone and my work here is done. Before leaving, I decided to do my good deed for the day. The arena was filled with captive slaves. Locating the slaver's key, I used it to unlock their bracers and set them free. Hopefully that puts some good karma on my ticket. Now, I did do my due diligence and searched the rest of Rothiran for any possible divine avatars or godly aspects. Unfortunately, there was nobody of the sort around these parts. So, recalling to the Imperial chapels, I reported to Lalatia. Apparently, Adasamsi had already checked in, and she told Varian about all my deeds and accomplishments. As a reward, the Imperial let me keep the Ice Blade. With that, thus ends the quest, Ice Blade of the Monarch. Speaking again with Elatia, she gives me my next assignment. Again, she puts away the riddles and poems and talks plainly. Apparently, one of the cult's members, Urjorad, left on a mission to defeat an evil sorcerer named Caraselmo. The healer took a powerful artifact with him called the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting. Through her visions, Varian has seen that great misfortune has come to Urjorad, meaning he could be captured or dead. The Oracle would like me to venture to the Daedric ruins of Ashal Mimikala and recover the scroll. While it's not necessary, she calls it a bonus if I'm able to slay Caraselmo and his bodyguard Meriarin. According to further conversation with Varian, she says that Urjorad was the apprentice of someone named Drofarin Stiffneck, another healer in the Imperial cult. Stiffneck was actually slain by Caraselmo, and Urjorad's mission was fueled by vengeance. However, even with the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting, everyone knew that he didn't stand a chance against Caraselmo and Meriarin. As for Caraselmo himself, his lore is just as interesting. The High Elf served in the court of Uriel Septim V. Back then, he was an honored member of the Empire. However, fast forward to the events of the Elder Scrolls Arena, apparently Caraselmo was implicated in Jagartharn's plot to overthrow the Emperor. Ever since then, both High Elves, Meriarin, and his master have been on the run. Since Caraselmo is a servant of Mehrunes Dagon, he's hiding out in Ashal Mimikala, the Daedric ruin that holds the shrine of the Prince of Destruction. I find it very interesting that this quest and the last one both had servants of Mehrunes Dagon as their main antagonists. My mind jumps to possible breadcrumbs and allusions to Dagon playing a part in the events of the next installment. Furthermore, it's interesting that Caraselmo aided Jagarthorn during the Elder Scrolls Arena, because, according to several sources, it's believed that Jagartharn was meant to play a role in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Again, it just makes you wonder that if that was the case, then this could have been a possible reference to a cut version of the Elder Scrolls IV. In any case, tangent aside, if the ruins of Ashal Mimikala sound familiar, that's because this would make for the third quest that's used its dungeons for content. Not only is Mehrunes Dagon's shrine here, but Caraselmo, the target for this quest, carries an artifact belonging to the Morag Tong and their questline. It's definitely a jam-packed ruin. Ashal Mimikala is located west of Hlormarin and south of Narmok. Its exterior is guarded by Daedra and cultists, and its interior is no different. Pretty much right away, I came across Meriarin and a Dremora Lord. Meriarin is a level 18 knight, and even though he only fights with a steel sword, he can prove to be a rather deadly opponent. What's more, Dremora Lords are some of the most difficult Daedric enemies that the player can face. They can cast powerful spells and wield mighty weapons. Together, Meriarin and the Lord did a number on my health, and it was some of the closest fighting that I've had so far. Once they were defeated, I continued to make my way through the shrine and very quickly ran into Caraselmo. The Altmer Mage is level 22, and if you let him get his casts off, he can prove to be a real problem. Paralysis, burden, powerful destruction spells, poisons, it can prove to be a deadly encounter. Defeating Caraselmo was satisfying, but it was only one half of the quest, and it was the optional part. Searching around for Urjorad, I eventually found him in the upper levels of the shrine. Unfortunately, Lelatia's vision was correct. The Khajiit had fallen into misfortune, aka he too was slain like his master. On his person, he had the Divine Staff of Judgment. This weapon damages the target's strength and endurance for 5 to 12 points each for 1 second. He also had the Chameleon Ring, which grants the user with Chameleon for 10% for 10 seconds on self. As for the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting, it was placed on one of the stones near Urjorad's corpse, showing that he was never even able to cast it. The scroll makes the target weak to fire damage by 18 to 81% for 5 seconds and deals anywhere from 18 to 81 points of fire damage for another 5 seconds. This certainly could have done the trick on Caraselmo if Urjorad was able to let it off. In any case, once everything was wrapped up here, I recalled to Ebonheart and reported to Varian. The Imperial acknowledged that I was able to avenge both the student and his master by slaying the High Elves. As a reward for my efforts, Lelatia gifted me the left and right gauntlets of glory, and she let me keep the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting. The left gauntlet fortifies the user's unarmored skill for 10 points for 120 seconds, and the right gauntlet fortifies hand-to-hand skill for 10 points for another 120 seconds as well. With that, thus ends the quest, the Scroll of Fiercely Roasting. Chatting with Lelatia again, she had one final quest for me. However, before getting into it, I figured I was long overdue for some advancements. Checking for promotions, I rose from the rank of Disciple to Oracle, becoming an equal to Varian. With the advancement came a reward. I was gifted Akatosh's ring. This piece of jewelry fortifies conjuration, mysticism, restoration, and enchant all by 10 points for 60 seconds. After that, I was able to rise to the ranks of Invoker, Theurgist, and finally Primate. Primate made me chuckle a bit. I thought it was a little odd to name the top of the class cultists after a category of mammals. Primate is the final rank for the Imperial cult, and there isn't a single person on Vvardenfell who matches it. Meaning, I'm now the highest ranking member of the faction, and technically in charge of this whole operation, but no one really acknowledges it, so it doesn't mean much. In any case, with that achievement out of the way, I got into the final assignment for the Oracle quests. Lalatia starts off by saying that she's had a vision of Skullcrusher, another legendary artifact. She then goes into the lore of the weapon. Skullcrusher was created by the smith Hilbongard and his enchanter Dorak Gusal during the captivity of Skyrim. The hammer is extremely light, yet it's able to pack an incredible punch. The weapon was lost to thievery, as a group of bandits was able to snatch it from a festival. However, Skullcrusher has a very unique power. Legend has it that it's able to leave any unlawful owner's possession and return to its maker's worksite. Scholars and historians believe that Hilbongard and Dorak forged the hammer here on Vvardenfell. It was done in some Daedric ruin, but no one knows which one exactly. Luckily for the cult, Lalatia's had a vision of Skullcrusher. She's seen it buried deep within the earth. It is at a Daedric ruin, and Varian can see that the forge uses molten lava as its heat source, which could help narrow it down to a few sites. However, said Daedric ruin has sunk below the surface, and all of its entrances have been sealed off. Again, luckily for the cult, Varian has seen another way in. Apparently, there's a secret entrance to the ruin through, quote, the halls of the dead. The priestess just doesn't know the specifics on which dungeons connect and where to go. For that, she tells me to speak with the savant or the scout. If I manage to find Skullcrusher, Varian believes that I should keep it. She just would like to deconsecrate its enchantment so that way it doesn't Mjolnir its way back to the forge. Remember a while back when I mentioned that eventually the Dunmer Savant and Dark Elf Scouts would offer different pieces of information? Well, it finally happened, and it sort of bit me in the back here. Speaking with Lalum Dreidel for the last time, I brought up the Halls of the Dead. Dreidel related it back to the Dunmer ancestral tombs, which of course are littered all around Vvardenfell. However, he isn't quite sure which one it could be, as plenty of them have gone unexplored. At this point, I was starting to think I'd have to stick my neck into every single crypt in search of some secret entrance, but I was holding out hope that Nalasa Serathrin could help me out here. Heading to Vivek and chatting with her, I asked about the Halls of the Dead too, and unfortunately, no dice. She said that I should speak with a savant on this matter, as they know riddles and prophecies better than scouts. Bringing up Skullcrusher, again, Nalasa said to check in with Dreidel for that one. Stumped, my heart sank and I was getting ready to make the Great Burial Ground circuit of Vvardenfell. However, I wanted to try dialogue with each NPC one more time, specifically Serathrin, as she had way more dialogue options than Lalum. Lo and behold, buried under all of her standard prompts, I found the topic of sealed Daedric ruins, something that Dreidel didn't have. When asked about them, Serathrin said that Anidnabia might be the site I'm looking for. It's near Sadrith Mora, and it was sealed by rockfall during the First Era. While she can't say with certainty that it has pools of lava within it, many Daedric ruins do, so it could be my best bet. Sounding good enough for me, as a lead's a lead, I began making my way to the eastern side of the island. Since Nalasa didn't mention where Anidnabia was in relation to Sadrith Mora, she just said that it was close by, I assumed that the ruin was somewhere northeast of the Telvanni village. Booking it past the Wolverine Hall, Anidnabia ended up being directly east of Sadrith Mora, and very close to the Imperial fort. Stepping foot on its grounds, I fought my way through a couple of Daedra and located the sealed entrance. To be honest, I forgot that I had to get in through an ancestral tomb, so for a split second I was scratching my head. Nevertheless, I took this opportunity to confirm this spot as the right dungeon, at least that's what I told myself, and then started to look for a crypt. Fortunately, I didn't have to look for very long. Northeast of the ruin, pretty much right beside it, was the Omeran ancestral tomb. Heading on inside, this crypt was guarded by Daedra, which isn't unheard of, but it's not that common either. Again, just another tip-off that I was likely in the right place. The actual tomb itself doesn't have very amazing loot, but the items you can pick off of the fallen Daedra are valuable and powerful. Not long into the adventure, I stumbled into a side room that had one of its walls blasted open. This led me to some natural tunnels, which in turn spat me out by the buried entrance of Anidnabia. This chamber was pretty big, and it had multiple levels to it which could have probably been explored. Very clearly seeing the doorway to the ruins though, that was solely what I focused on. Wouldn't you know it too, it was plated as the Forge of Hilbongard. Going on inside, the first thing I noticed was a scroll of Windwalker. This granted me with the ability to levitate for 500 points for 60 seconds, as well as invisibility for another 60 seconds. Taking this as a nudge, I grabbed the scroll and held onto it while I did a bit of my own magic here. For the most part, the only enemies in this section of Adonabia were Atronachs. A Frosty guarded the door to the actual forge itself, and inside the smithy there was a lone fire Atronach. The forge was filled with a bunch of interesting treasures like enchanted gear, skill books, and repair hammers. Again, there was another consumable for levitate on one of the workbenches, so at this point I figured my best bet was to look up for Skullcrusher. At the center of the zone, there was a circular pit that contained a small ledge. On said ledge, there was an anvil, an altar, and a Grandmaster's hammer. Having never seen one of these before, I mistakenly thought it was Skullcrusher, but quickly realized that that's not the case. I guess it was just added there to show how skilled Hilbongard was at his craft. Instead, Skullcrusher was located in a floating chest just above the molten pit. The hammer was one-handed, dealt a max of 60 base damage, had a weight of 15, and had the enchantments of Feather for 15 points and Fortify Attack for 5 points. While my character isn't proficient with blunt weapons, I'm pretty sure Skullcrusher would give my Daedric Daikatana a run for its money. With the artifact in hand, I was ready to leave this place. Recalling to Ebonheart, I reported to Lalatia Varian for the final time. The priestess said that she couldn't detect any sort of evil magic or curse on the hammer, meaning it won't leave my inventory. In hopes that I continue my service to the Nine, Varian gives me the ring, Foe Grinder. She finished by saying that that's all the quests she has for me. If she needs my help again, she'll ask one of the other higher ranking members to relay the information. Spoiler alert, but that never happens. Foe Grinder is an enchanted ring that fortifies blunt for 20 points for 120 seconds, essentially making Skullcrusher even more OP. At this point, no matter who I talk to, they all say that if any more work comes up, they'll send word. But like I said, that doesn't happen, and that's it for the Imperial cult quests. There are no more advancements or assignments. Even the highest ranking member of the faction, or I guess at this point, the second highest, the Invoker, Ruchia Kunitian, doesn't have anything to add on. So with that, thus ends the quest, Skullcrusher, that wraps up Lalatia Varian's storyline, and that finishes up the Imperial cult's questline as a whole. I enjoyed Lalatia's quests. I found them to be very entertaining, informative, and they didn't, quote, waste my time. What I mean by that is that every quest had some sort of significance to it. Whether there was lore, a decent reward, or a continuation of the story, it all felt concise and easy to follow. I think it was nice too that there were only 5 Oracle quests. More than 6, and I feel like it would have started to drag on a bit. As I've already said, my favorite was probably the Boots of the Apostle, as Tiber Septim's lore will never not fascinate me. As for my least favorite, to be honest I wouldn't really say I had one, but maybe the Ice Blade of the Monarch. It just felt like it had the least to offer in terms of background information and lore. But if the other quests were 9 out of 10s, that one was like an 8, I still enjoyed it. Overall, I'd tie Euless Trupter's story arc with Lalatia Varian's in terms of which quests I liked the most. Euless's were pretty unique in the sense that they were all about schmoozing up to the right people, and I personally love that sort of thing in the Elder Scrolls. However, they weren't very lore heavy. In terms of least favorite, it would probably have to be Sinolian Tuniphus's. His quests were just too simple. I understand that they're aimed at lower level players, but to me, you can see the skill jump from Euless, Lalatia's, and even Kay's. K's were pretty easy too, and there weren't that many of them, but I suppose they offered more of a challenge than killing a Netch and collecting ingredients. Thank you everybody for coming on this journey with me. I'd love to know your thoughts on Lalatia's quests down below, as well as the Imperial cult storyline as a whole. Until next time, keep on adventuring.